So for years now, there's been a lot of talk about growing loneliness, in America specifically. How people are more disconnected than ever from their communities, and the average person is living a far lonelier life than ever. And recently I was thinking about this a lot, right? This conversation's been going on for years now, it feels like. But I was really thinking about it because when I was in Japan, which I recently was, I felt like I saw almost like where things were heading here in America, right? And largely in the Western world. I mean, I don't live my daily life anywhere in Europe, but from what I understand, similar trends are taking place, right? I think that with this whole idea of an increasing loneliness amongst everyone, right, there is a temptation by everyone to blame it on individual actors, right? Especially, I mean, you know, we've all heard like everyone got lonelier in 2020. If you look at any statistic, that's simply not true, right? Yes, that was a big turning point, but I mean, it was happening for years before then too. It was not just, this is not something that came out of nowhere from one event. You'll hear a lot of people in the older generations go, oh, it's social media. These kids weren't so addicted to these phones and, you know, whatnot. This wouldn't be an issue. Nobody knows how to talk to each other anymore. And, you know, I'm not going to sit here and say that things didn't get lonelier after 2020 for everybody because of the fact that we grew more disconnected, right? I'm not going to say that social media does not play a role in it. Maybe if this was gone on an individual level, we would be forced to talk to each other more. However, though, I want to push back against that, especially, namely because of what I saw when I was in Japan, right? I think that it was like almost more obvious to a point where I could understand what I was feeling in America but couldn't articulate. That so much of the way this happens is because of the way that our daily lives are planned, right? The way our infrastructure works. You know, it's not just, the reason things got lonely after 2020 was not because like, you know, everybody was like, it's so cool to sit inside and watch Twitch and Joe Rogan. I'm going to do that forever now. It was because that's when so many people realized, wait, we can save a ton of money if we digitize literally everything, right? I saw similar things when I was over there that really got me thinking about this, namely how easy it was with all their, you know, the way that they have everything work with their infrastructure, that you can go days there without talking to people, like very easily. I think you could do it here in America too, if you wanted to. I think you could totally go days talking to nobody, but over there, you, like, without trying, you could do it because everything is on your phone, everything's digitized. And I think a similar trend is happening here. I think that's where a lot of this comes from, more than we would like to admit. The fact that you need to pull out your phone to scan a QR code at a restaurant, I think is infinitely more consequential than anything else. I simply think that the way our lives are set up now are no longer oriented to be in a community. Right? This is just bad. I'm not gonna sit here, you know, I'm gonna discuss in large part today how I think on an individual level we are making this worse, right? Not because I believe that this is an individual problem. I don't think that, like, you know, I hate the idea that we can bootstrap our way out of like a clearly societal trend, right? Like if millions of people year after year are feeling more lonely, I would never sit here and be like, well, that's on you. Like, no, of course there's something going on, right? I'm not going to ignore that. However, in this video, what I want to do is not to focus on that. I want to discuss how on an individual level, I do feel that some of us are making this worse, namely with a lack of ability to be alone anymore. And, you know, it seems paradoxical that that's like the part of this to discuss. It is paradoxical, actually. It doesn't seem paradoxical. It is just paradoxical to say this is, you know, this is a growing trend. Here's how you can get better in this trend, right? That's not the solution. Nobody's gonna say that's the solution. Unfortunately, it's useful though, right? Unfortunately, it is now a useful thing to get better at spending time by yourself, right? And I feel that part of the reason I want to say why this feels the way it does, right? Because yes, this is happening on a mass level. However, I think it feels worse on an individual level because of some of the habits that we all hold. And I do want to give credence to that. I do want to say that, like, learning how to better spend your time in solitude is actually probably one of the most effective things towards healing this, because like that's all I aim to do, right? Because I'm not going to sit here and be like, we can fix this, right? We can't. I have no idea how to fix this. I'm guy in room. Like I don't know what's going on here, but I do know that in my life, when I've observed, I've gone through different eras. Some where I've had lots of people I hang out with and talk to, others where I'm like super secluded and stuff, right? So I feel that like seeing over the years what's given me reprieve and what's made things worse for me is genuinely much better, right? And I think a part of the what I'm getting at here, why I think things do feel so bad, is because we are now like, when we're lonely now, right? In the past, we would do things to fill our time. Things that would often like maybe not be as good as hanging out with people and like seeing people and socializing, but things that were still like very much beneficial to us in one regard or another, right? For an example, it wouldn't be uncommon to, if you're lonely, read a book, right? And there's a great line in Jonathan Franzen's essay collection called How to Be Alone. Probably what I'll title this video, right? There's a great line in it where he says, what books do, what reading teaches us how to do, is how to be alone. And, obviously that's not directly true. Books don't teach you how to be alone, but what they do teach you that's very useful is how to spend time in quiet solitude without feeling like you are rotting away and being reminded constantly of how lonely you are, right? And what I feel we have the sensibility to do nowadays, in large part, is when we're lonely, when we're alone in our room and we're like, man, none of my friends are available tonight. We've all been there, it's a Friday night. You're like, man, like, two of my friends are on a date right now. One of my friends is like out of town. I'm alone right now. It sucks, right? It sucks. It's one of the worst feelings. What we do now, though, is instead of occupying our time with something that, maybe is worse than hanging out with your friends, but still like good, we we plug into the friendship simulator. We put on a podcast, or, we scroll our feeds and we try to make ourselves feel better by distracting, right? And oftentimes, as much as it's not a direct consequence, all this really does is remind you that you're alone right now. Seeing constantly people pop up as you try to sedate yourself from that feeling is not actually good. Like, it's not doing anything. And oftentimes it's just going to lead to you spiraling more, because you grow dependent to it. You don't have something you can do that actually is good, so you keep doing that. Every time you feel a little bit alone, you open that app. And it's such a overly serious way of talking about social media, but I earnestly do believe that people treat social media way more like drugs than they do any other form of entertainment. Like, people grow dependent on this, right? And I think it's because of this. I think as life grows lonelier, people are earnestly trying to cope with content, right? Oftentimes not content that's in pursuit of actually like being anything of substance, right? I think you could unfortunately make the argument that's what this is. I try to make these fun conversations that, like, I think my hope is always that you can come away from watching one of my videos maybe being like, oh, not that I learned something, but I thought about something I wouldn't have otherwise thought about. I try to differentiate in that way. I try to not be another person making, just a random thing in an effort to get people parasocial. But, I can't deny that just because of the way that YouTube works, that could be a function of what's happening. Like, I'm not gonna, pretend not to be self-aware when I 100% feel sometimes that that's what's going on here, right? Not that I feel you guys are, wait, let me emphasize here. Not that I'm feeling that I am doing that on purpose, but sometimes I can't help but feel what I'm putting out is cheap, right? Because of how content works. Knowing that no matter how hard I try to make something that delivers substance to somebody watching it, it could still just be background noise because, they're like, don't want to do the dishes, right? And like, to me, that not that it cheapens anything in my own sense of like what I'm making, but that's like a real fear, because sometimes that's all that content is, right? And circling back to the point here, I think that the reason this is so bad is because learning how to be alone is a skill. And I do believe that it offers real reprieve from loneliness in a way that distraction cannot, right? Thinking back to Jonathan Franzen writing this essay. He has a whole book of essays by the same name, by the way. If you are interested at all in this topic, more so, totally recommend checking it out. He wrote these essays back in, I want to say they're written from around the mid-90s to the 2000s, right? And what I think they do so well is they were able to forecast our modern day before the modern day came, right? Like it or not, even though it's a far worse example of what we're talking about than social media is, TV is still relevant to this conversation in some regard. And actually, I believe since it's less relevant, since it is a less potent version of what social media does, it actually ends up functioning better as something to analyze, right? And that's what Jonathan Franzen does in these essays. He looks at TV and he goes, man, I use this as a coping mechanism when I'm lonely instead of reading, instead of doing something that offers real value to me, and that is causing some sort of ailment to me, you know? He never locates quite what it is. However, I do think that, you know, locating or not, it speaks very well to how things actually function, right? And it's weird because on paper, I mean, like, it should be the same thing. But, you know, just how, like, you know, not all vices are made equal, I guess, is you know, I guess a way to look at it. You know, when I'm sad, I'll, like, hang out with my friends, right? If I'm having a bad day, something I'll totally do is text my friends, like, what are you guys doing tonight? You know, sometimes I'll just ignore if I have, like, some work to do that day. I'll just be like, I'll ignore this, do another day. Feeling down, let's go do that, right? That's a coping mechanism. That's fully a coping mechanism, but that's healthy. Or rather, maybe not healthy, I'm sure I'm avoiding something there, but it's healthier than if you were to try and ignore it completely and just do something that sedates you for a while, right? It's a type of sedation that still offers you value because it is socializing, right? And I think that's what so much of what we do needs to become, right? And in the same way that entertainment, you know, sedation through hanging out with people is still sedation, but it offers you some sort of value. And I think entertainment can also be the same thing. I know in my life I've been like, you know, this is when I was much younger, but like I would read comic books so I was sad when I was a kid, right? Because it would be some form of escapism that would just help. And I know I saw a clear distinction between that and like watching TV. And I was like, I never understood it back then. I still don't. I still don't know if we could explain exactly why a medium is more, you know, better for you to consume than another, I guess, if that's what you want to conclude. But it is. Like, there's something more wholesome about it, right? And now if I felt back then that TV was worse for me than a reading a comic book was, today I feel that I could almost do a hierarchy of, like, social media, television, movies, I guess. I don't know why I threw movies in there. I wasn't even thinking about that. Comic books, real books. Like, there's almost a hierarchy of how much value these things can provide you. Because, like, I suppose in the same way that when you're stressed, learning a healthy coping mechanism to, like, journal is really good. When you're lonely, a healthy coping mechanism of reading fixes things a lot more. Because you also need to be alone to read. I think that's a big part of it. Like, it's almost like I'm not alone right now because I don't have something to go do, or because I feel lonely. I'm alone right now because I'm doing something that requires silence. I think that's a big part of it. Because, I mean, how many times? This is like the worst type of hangout. I'm sure we've all been to one of these where it's like, you're like hanging out with your friends and everybody's just like on their phone after a while. And like the idea of like, I mean, it's silly, but like we like going on our phones with each other now, which is weird. But I think knowing you're doing an activity that you could have somebody next to you for feels worse than being like, I am in solitude right now because I'm doing something that I want to be in solitude for. And I don't know, maybe that's a distraction in another regard even, but I think it helps. I do. And I think that it's a much healthier way of doing things than to try to just ignore. I think ignoring is always I think ignoring is probably the worst thing to do, because like, if you address something, or at least understand that it's there, and you don't solve it, you're at least one step closer to solving it. Because every time you feel that little ailment, that little piece of distress, in the back of your head, you'll kind of be working on it. Whereas if you just fully ignore it, if you're just beaming images into your brain on the social media, you're like, not only are you ignoring it, but you are also putting up an active block that's making it so you have no chance of solving it. Whereas reading, or doing something that provides substance to you in that way, is, maybe you'll find something about yourself in there. You know, it can serve as a mirror sometimes. Fiction, nonfiction, whatever it may be. You learn much more. And maybe you can solve your problems that way. Maybe you can feel better. I don't know. I feel like this started with a really great point, but I realized that I just had a kind of a novel observation, maybe, that reading made me feel better sometimes. But you know, maybe it's novel observation that helped me feel less alone over the years, so maybe it's a novel observation that can help one of you too. Try it. I have no idea. This is the painting. I wanted to, so I feel like the last couple of days we've done abstract form in a way that's very, like, straightforward, of like, I'm just gonna make something that you don't really know what it is. This, I want to try something a little more abstract, but with clear elements. Like, you know what's going on here. Like, there's a border, there's another thing, there's maybe perspective going on. Like, it's confusing, but it still makes sense, I guess. I don't know. I think it's interesting. I think it's cool. I feel like I have less thoughts on these paintings when I make them, and then I look at them like a little later, and I'm like, okay, actually, maybe I like that one, or maybe I hate that one. So go check this out on the TikTok and the Instagram. And until next time, guys, gals, and pals, my name is Max Dice. This has been Paint Talk, episode 254, and I have paint on my hand. I'm here every morning, painting and talking with you all.